Hello, everyone. It's Shane Conto, your Wasteland reviewer. And welcome to the Wasteland, my weekly show where I take a deep dive into a particular film. And we're getting towards the end of the 1950s for John Ford, and get inching ever closer to being done. This very, very long journey through John Ford's filmography, which will wind up being a year and a half long, and that's fun to process. But we'll be talking about The Wings of Eagles. But joining me is my friend and colleague, Amy Atkinson. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We talk movies all the time, and now we're going to talk on camera. So, but yes, so Amy is joining in this lovely journey through John Ford's filmography here. And to for those who haven't tuned into the show before, we have three segments. So we have our coming attractions for Friday, October 4th. It is spooky season, and there are a lot of horror movies coming out on a variety of places for this weekend. And then we have our feature film, which is The Wings of Eagles. And then we'll be wrapping things up with our recommendations. So this weekend actually has a lot of streaming films coming out, whether there's multiple Netflix, Hulu, Prime, Shudder, Max, a lot of streaming films. The biggest movie coming out this weekend is the sequel that nobody asked for in Joker, Joker 2. But Amy, what film are you most excited to check out this weekend?
I really want to see Salem's Lot. I would love to see basically the remake of that. The original is one of my favorites.
Yeah, and I still need to watch it. And my wife Jess and I still need to finish the audiobook, which is gonna take us a little while. We
Mhm.
haven't listened to it a whole lot recently. But no, I'm also really excited about this one too, because honestly, ever since I got back into reading, I'm pretty sure a unreasonable proportion of the books that I've read have just been Stephen King.
Yeah.
So, and this is definitely one that I really want to read. But it'll be interesting to see because if I'm not mistaken, this is about like a 2 hour movie, and which is being adapted from a very thick book,
Yeah.
very thick book,
Epic, thick book. Yeah.
epic thick book. And the mini series was, a mini series. So it'll be interesting to see how they lean it all out.
Yeah.
Um, Hopefully they do it well. It's from Gary Doberman, who previously did the Annabelle Comes Home film in the Conjuring universe series because they keep making those. And apparently he wrote the first two Nun movies and the two It movies. So he definitely has horror in his blood. So we'll see how this one turns out.
Yeah.
The one that I'm most excited for is Saoirse Ronan's The Outrun that comes out this weekend. And to be perfectly frank, the only main reason is because it has Saoirse Ronan in it. That's good enough for me. Uh, so she's my favorite actress working today. Um, Billy Andrews will still always be number one. Um, but I love Saoirse Ronan, and I'm looking forward to seeing her getting into like more. Like I don't want to sound like mature films because like for a long time she's been playing teenagers and like really young adults and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see this film which tackles some like heavy topics and stuff like that. I was trying to remember what was last time she was in something to be perfectly honest.
Oh my
Seems like
gosh.
it's been
Yeah.
a
I
little while.
feel like it has been a little while.
But she had some great success with Greta Gerwig.
Mm.
I was half expecting to see her pop up in Barbie somewhere, but
Right.
maybe that one didn't work out. Maybe she'll wind up in Greta Gerwig's Chronicles of Narnia films that she's going to be doing for Netflix. So there you
Could
go.
be.
But The Outrun's coming out. It's coming out in theaters this weekend, but not like a ton. Luckily, living in New Jersey, at least there's some theaters that have it. So I'll be looking
Yeah.
forward to checking that out. And then I'm morbidly curious to see how Joker turns out because it was a bold choice for them to make a musical sequel that every
For sure.
interview they tried to say it's not a musical.
And don't they do that with other films though too, when they don't want it to be? Yeah, yeah.
So they will not acknowledge this movie as a musical, but you can't trick us. Um, and it's also like 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Okay.
From the director of The Hangover. Just throwing that out there.
Just throwing that out there. Wow.
Hey, Todd Phillips did the first Joker movie, but yes, he also directed The Hangover, which is his most famous movie up until, Joker.
Joker.
But now let's jump into our John Ford film, which is The Wings of Eagles. And this came out in 1957, a biography of Navy flyer turned screenwriter Frank W. Spig Reed, who has had actually worked with John Ford. So this is a
Yeah.
very interesting kind of film for him to be directing, to be perfectly honest. And a little bit of background. So this was shot in Metro Color. There were a lot of color film companies back in the 50s and stuff. Technicolor and everything, bringing that to the screen. Stars John Wayne, Maureen O'Hara, and Dan Daly. Dan Daly had worked in a couple of John Ford films up to this point. Obviously, John Wayne certainly worked in plenty of John Ford movies up to this point. But like I said, this is based on the life of Spig Weed. What a name.
What a name.
Um, and focuses on the inception of the U.S. Naval Aviation Corps, as he was a big part of that. Ford and Weed were friends, so that is an interesting thing. It's like John Ford making a film about his friend who did die when he was like 52 years old. So he did not live a very long life. This is based off of Weed's own We Plaster, pardon me, the Japs, which was an actual article that was released in American Magazine. So certainly of the times. So, but that was like his memoirs that they posted because apparently he was a pretty famous figure from World War II in the Pacific and everything. And this is the third of five John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara collaborations, which I'm pretty sure the most famous one's The Quiet Man.
Yeah.
Obviously, very, very Irish and very gorgeous and beautiful color. The Technicolor in that was amazing. But Amy, what were your general thoughts on the Wings of Eagles?
Well, I mean, in my initial reaction for the first 40 minutes or so was a little disappointment in, I think, in the way that the film was presented. It was almost slapstick in the beginning,
Mhm.
um, and hard for me to take it seriously, I think, based on the fight scenes and things, just the ruckus behavior of the Navy, and then of course their counterparts, the Army, with
Yep.
that competition about everything all the time. But I think as I got through the film and started to think about the time in which it was made, it that kind of film made sense to me,
Hmm.
in the way that, like I said, in the way it was made, the way it was presented. Yeah, it brings like my dad was a
Hmm.
huge John Wayne fan, and so I always remember being a little kid and hearing those movies in the background. And my dad was also a Marine,
Hmm.
and so for him, he may not have seen as much ruckus behavior when he was in the service, but I would imagine that he probably, if I was never around when he watched it, but I can imagine that
Hmm.
he did, and he probably loved it. He probably has got a huge kick out of it. So if anything, it just brings more sentimental things
Hmm.
for me, feelings for me. Um, but I mean, I don't know. Overall, it wasn't a bad film, but I could go in, I will wait so that you can talk yourself and then ask me questions or something. But
Hmm.
I guess I guess I'm pretty neutral about the movie. It bothers me that Maureen O'Hara was not treated well, and that's just because it's Maureen O'Hara. Who's
Yep.
not going to treat her well? But yeah.
It's so this is it's like 60 something that I've watched of his films. And I feel like there's like layers to it. Because like
Hmm.
there's films that you watch and you're like, this is why John Ford's considered one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Then there's some of the films where you're just like, this just feels like any run of the mill kind of film that you would see in like the 50s and 40s, 50s and stuff like that. And then there was some where I'm just like, what the hell was he doing? Or who have aged horribly,
Hardly.
horribly. This one I feel like is like right in that center of like, feels like a movie that came out in the 50s. It's a
Yeah.
biopic. It doesn't really dig deep in a whole lot of sequences of the film, except for like, I feel like one. And it's the whole I need to wiggle my toe. Like
Yeah.
that section of the film feels like this is like they're actually taking time to flesh this out and build it up. But everything else feels like very quick, like
Yes.
going over things. Tonally, I think this movie has some problems because, as you pointed out, there's a lot of slapsticky kind of humor about
Yeah.
it. And then there's scenes where it's like shockingly like Kyle dies. And you're just
Yeah.
like, this movie
In the
didn't
middle
set
of
me up
all of
for
that.
this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then a scene later, like time passes and now they have two more kids. And it's like, oh, well, it's fine. We have two more now.
We have too much.
Uh, and I feel like the biggest one that was a challenge for me was the point where like we'd had a horrible accident
Yeah.
where like he wound up being paralyzed. And that came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's like he comes home, Maureen O'Hara and John Wayne are like kissing on the couch. The girls walk in on them. And it's like, why don't you go up to bed? And then it cuts to him smoking in bed. It's just like,
Right.
it's like, well, we know what they just did. Then he falls down the stairs and is paralyzed. I'm like, what? There's
I
so much
agree.
whiplash in
Yeah.
terms of that. I do feel like the film settled in after those, like the first act of this movie is kind of a mess, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree.
And then, like, obviously, I'm guessing this is true to the story, but like, I feel like this film never really confronts him enough about being such an absent,
Yeah.
horrible husband and father.
Yeah. I agree. I agree 100%. Like the first part of the film being so slapstick. I think it's a lot of it was seemed almost patchwork together
Mhm.
because he's trying to cover this man's life that was
Yes.
prolific. And but I almost like I had two different thoughts that I was grappling with in my head.
Mm.
One, does he have all that slapstick in the beginning because he's worried that once we hit the whole he fell down the stairs and he becomes paralyzed, we're able to like handle that? Or does he do that slapstick and then bits of humor throughout to kind of help us like somehow like we can't handle what happens. I don't know. Like I'm not being as articulate as I would like to be. I just find it hard to have that kind of thing going on in the
Mm.
beginning and then all of a sudden like you said, boom, baby dies, falls down the stairs. If it's like, whoa, wait a minute. So whiplash is a great way to describe it. Yeah.
Well, and even his more serious films, like I just rewatched The Searchers, which is my favorite John Ford film, but like there's a surprising amount of humor in it
Yeah.
that's like sprinkled through. But it's like sprinkled through.
Hmm.
This feels like there's whole sequences of this film that's aiming towards comedy. And then it's
Yeah.
like, what am I supposed to do with that when, the girls basically only know him as a guy on the movie screen in
Yeah.
newsreels and stuff
Guy
like
with the
that. And then
guns.
he comes home and they're like, and like, I'm your daddy. And it's just like this whole thing where she's like out doing bridge and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then later in the film, and this was like, if I'm not mistaken, this was like the last time we see Maureen O'Hara's like, he's gonna come home. And then Pearl Harbor happened.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
he's just like, she's sitting there devastated.
Yeah.
after on the phone, and you're just like, come on, man.
I
And
know.
it's frustrating. And like, your protagonist doesn't have to be a great person.
Right.
But if they're not, I feel like the film has to come to grips with that. And
I agree.
I don't think this film really tackled that. It kind of was just like very matter of fact, just moving along,
Yeah.
checking boxes. And like the and this could be fully true. The most emotional moment of the film is with him and his men at the end of the film.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely right. Yeah.
And it's just like they were the family he chose to spend time with.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yep. The family and the other part of that family, he has these sentimental moments, especially I think at the end of the film where he's imagining when he was first with Min,
Yeah,
the wife's name. And it like that to me, that seems like the more sentimental side of him too, the human side of him, where he's imagining back to that. But it's he could never quite it clearly he couldn't give his all to them, which is sad. And
yeah.
it was about his naval family and service to his country and etc., which really did it's admirable. However, it also made him look like a selfish,
Yep.
you know.
Well, and I feel like as the film goes on, I feel like it does better job conveying what the film's trying to convey.
Yeah.
And that's reinforcing like your point from earlier, some of the points that I made. And by that point, where you're in like the last 20 something minutes of this movie, I feel like the film does start to really come to
Yeah.
grips with like, yeah, like you have a lot of regrets at this
Yes.
point. And you even had that moment where his old pal comes in, who's actually played by John Ford's son-in-law.
Oh, I
Uh,
didn't know that. Okay.
he was the fiance in The Searchers,
Yeah.
Charlie McCrary, and yeah, he was married to John Ford's daughter, and he was a singer and stuff like that, which is how he
Yeah.
started going into John Ford films. But he comes in,
Right.
he's like, I only have a couple hours, come with me, and then he's like, I had it, like he has this epiphany, and then he completely tunnel visions into
Yeah.
his work again, and his friend just like, all right. And like that's him. And like that's where it started to really like hit. I think where it's
Yes.
like you can tell like there's a lot of people disappointed in his life.
Yeah. 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 I guess and there's scenes where that kind of like you can see the like you said, there were points towards the end of the movie where you see the impact of that more than you necessarily. And I mean, I guess I guess Ford had to introduce the idea of this person,
Mhm.
which was someone who was very ambitious
Yep.
and married to the service and so on and so forth. And you get easily annoyed with him in the beginning because of his relationship with Min.
Mhm.
And even when the baby dies, there's that scene where Min is sitting in the kitchen and he basically just goes and stands over her.
Yep.
um he doesn't show any kind of like
It's like
emotion.
comfort her.
Right, for God's sakes, put your hand on her shoulder or something.
Which
um
I one of the films that I watched his relatively recently was The Long Gray Line.
okay.
And this starred Tyrone Power, who's like an Irish immigrant, meets an Irish immigrant, Maureen O'Hara. They fall in love, and there's a lot of similar beats to this man's story
Okay.
as Weed's story, including like the death of a child. So like,
Yeah.
why do I keep seeing Maureen O'Hara having to mourn the death of her like newborn children, John
Newborn
Ford?
children.
What are
Yeah.
you doing to me? Like, it's so very interesting how those scenes are treated differently in the two films because I
Okay.
feel like in the Long Gray Line it is much more of like this process of both of them grieving, and there's people there around them, and there's actual multiple scenes processing the loss. And then here it's just like, whoop, on to the next one.
On to the next. Yep.
And maybe it does get the point across that he is distant, and maybe that's really what the point of that was or not. I think I think John Wayne does a fine job in this film. He's
Yeah.
not really known for like a large amount of range as an actor, but the more of these John Ford films that I've watched, the more I've respected him as an actor. He won't get my respect as a human being. But like,
Ditto. Yeah.
but like as an actor, I'm like more to him than I think history
Yeah.
remembers. And I think he does a fine job in a lot of those scenes, but I feel like it's the people around him that make this. And like Maureen O'Hara has a thankless job in this film,
She
being
does.
being this wife, and a lot of actresses gave some of their best performances being those thankless roles in movies because
Yeah.
a lot of films were like that, and she's great in the
She
scenes that she
is.
gets to shine.
Yeah.
Dan Daly's the friend who's there with like the guitar and
Yeah.
everything.
Jughead. Yeah.
Yeah, Jughead, who he starred in a John Ford film that I watched. I don't even remember how long ago it is at this point. And like he's this guy who he's the first one to volunteer in his town to go away to World War II, and then winds up being picked to be a rifle trainer, preparing people, and they never send him away.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was the first thing I think I ever saw Dan Daly in, and I really enjoyed him in this.
Yeah.
Um, I'm really appreciating my Ward Bond sightings as they last because unfortunately he passed away in 1960. So like this is
Okay.
57. It's getting up to the point where he's
Yeah.
been in so many John Ford movies up to this point, and he's honestly because of this journey became one of my favorite character actors. He's just so much fun, and he's in one scene in this. I was sitting, I'm like, "Where's Ward?" And he finally popped up, and he had like a good scene with John Wayne in it. But there's a lot of talented character actors that fill out, especially the other servicemen, the
Yeah.
family that he chooses, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you suppose, Shane, that
Mhm.
because Ford had to, well, A, try to encapsulate this man's life in a 2 and so hour movie, but more importantly, that they were friends, that maybe that played a role in the way he was
I
able to portray him?
I feel like you can't ignore that
Hmm.
thinking about this film because like how brutally honest are you really going to be about your
Yeah.
friend
Hmm.
putting them in a film that's going to like last forever?
Yeah.
So I do feel like maybe that might be a piece of why it's not as harsh as it could be. Because like at this point, if I'm not, I'm assuming he passed away at this point.
Yeah.
When he made this film, and like, do you really want to like run your friend through the dirt
Yeah.
in a film and stuff like that?
Exactly.
Which maybe you shouldn't be one to make
Yeah.
a biopic about your friend. And also, it's a biopic, and that is the biggest pitfall of
Yeah.
biopics is pacing and being able to really flesh out everything.
Yeah.
The connecting this back to the long gray line, that is also a film that took place over 50 years. And it was a 2 hour, 15-minute film.
Yeah.
I feel like that one did a better job of moving the story along and everything in terms of how it told the story. I just feel
Yeah.
like this one's a little clunky towards the beginning because they rushed through a lot of things and rushed through some things that they shouldn't have rushed
Yeah.
through.
Like the baby, their loss of their baby. Yeah.
Like I watched this over the weekend and we're recording on a Wednesday, but like I swear, like literally almost the next shot after that scene is like they jumped years and now they have two daughters.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, they moved on.
We have two new ones. Yeah.
Yeah, we
Mm,
have two new ones. And like I get it. It was still at a time where like mortality was
yeah.
higher than it is today. So
Yeah.
it's like that did happen. Like
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people growing up from that era had siblings that they never met
Yeah.
or and stuff like that. Oh, I have two siblings that I never met because they died like 10 years before I was born. But like it happens. And I just
Yeah.
wish like they would have processed this better. But no, it felt
For
more like
sure.
a plot device to really show like just how disconnected he was.
Yeah.
And I think a rule of thumb should be dead children shouldn't be plot devices to
Absolutely.
move the plot along.
Absolutely not. I mean, that you're absolutely right. You spend a little less time on the slapstick stuff in the beginning and just flesh that out even a little bit more. Yeah.
Now, I'll admit there was some of the humor that really hit me. I
Uh-huh.
I got a kick out of the whole dynamic with him and the army and the navy, the two of them going in and having to speak for themselves and why they were all beat up.
Yeah.
And the army guy's like, I have no idea what to say to them. It's like, what did John Wayne say?
John
Um,
Wayne says, I'm gonna tell them that I forgot my wife's birthday and
yes,
she basically socked me in the face.
they can't say no to that one.
No.
They get in the room and he stole it.
And he steals it and leaves him standing there. And John Wayne was like, yeah, without coming out and saying I got nothing, he pretty much said I
Like
got
I think he literally said, he's like, and he's just like, well, I got nothing.
nothing.
And
That's
just
right.
moves along with the
Yeah.
scene. So like some of the humor does work, and
Yeah.
I do think John Ford had a good sense of humor.
Yeah.
There's some other films where he doesn't have a good sense of humor,
Okay.
or at least it's a little antiquated. Some
Yeah.
of his sense of humor, but like in this one, it's a military thing. A lot of his films focus on the military. Like
Yeah.
John Ford was literally in the military making
Yeah,
films during
he
World War
was
II.
like a naval aviator or something like that too, wasn't he?
Well, at least, well, during World War II, at that point, he was
Or at
like
least in the Navy.
50, probably.
Yeah.
And he made films. I covered his propaganda films that he made for World
Okay.
War II.
Oh,
It-
that's right. He filmed, that's right. He was I forget, he was at one of the battles and he filmed, yeah,
So I covered Midway,
that's it. Norway.
North Africa campaign. That's probably the one I thought was the best and most interesting.
Okay.
And then he made a documentary about sexually transmitted diseases um for the soldiers.
Oh, okay.
And it's just like watch what you're doing when you're away, and
Right.
if you have a problem, this is what you got to do.
Oh my gosh.
I
Wow.
did that. I covered that one with my friend Paige, and we had a kick talking
I
about
I
that.
bet. Yeah.
It was very graphic too. There was a lot of
Interesting.
there's a lot of body parts that you wound up seeing in it. So like John Ford made a very detailed, very medically accurate for the most part. I'm assuming some of the things that they and some of the stuff they said to put on the wound, it's like you would not put on human flesh
Ever, right?
in
Oh my gosh.
2024. It's like
Wow.
we've known for a long time you shouldn't do stuff like that. But I guess, Amy, is there anything else that stood out to you about the Wings of Eagles that you wanted to add?
I think it's interesting because I when I first started watching it, right? And
Mhm.
he puts the army guy in the back of the plane and he's flying around
Wild.
wild and decides that he's going to go through the hangar with the plane. Can I tell you, for a split second I thought to myself, did Jerry Bruckheimer like take a little bit of this when with Maverick and Top Gun and his whole, so that was interesting. I literally thought that for a minute.
Was so I was just listening to shameless plugs. the BTS Movie Club on SPDM Crew Podcasting Network that I'm a part of, and they were covering Kill Bill Volume 1.
Okay.
And when she's in the truck, she's like, wiggle your toe, wiggle your toe. And I never thought any of
Oh my
thing of that.
God.
And then watching this movie and then listening to that podcast, I'm like, wait a minute. I
Yeah. How about that?
didn't expect Quentin Tarantino to be a big John Ford fan. But like, was that a reference too? But no,
Yeah.
there's definitely some like modern action movies that took some hints from that opening plane
had
sequence for
had
sure.
to have. I think about I do. I think about in the original Top Gun when he's
Mhm.
doing the flybys and he's,
Yep.
that Maverick and all this other stuff. And it was basically like, oh, that's who he is, and I got a sense of that instantly when I
Yeah.
watched that first scene.
Well, I guess technically this is the start of that, right?
Yeah,
Like these
it
are
is.
the start of the naval aviation, and like
Yeah.
fast forward 40 years to the 80s from World War II era, and it's like that was Top Gun.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. That's right. That's right.
John Wayne, the first Maverick.
That's funny.
Well, he
Yeah, he
sure
was our
acted that
first man.
way.
He did. He did. I mean, overall, I did not I wasn't I didn't think that I just wasted 2 hours of my life or
Mhm.
whatever. I didn't feel that way.
Well, I'm
I
glad.
think it was yeah, I think it was just an interesting look at, that time period in
Here.
which the movie was made. And like the the trope of, well, I'm broken and you need to leave, like with Maureen O'Hara. I'm a shadow of myself and I don't want to hold you back, and you need to go and live your life, kind of thing.
Biggest frustration. It's like he was in the hospital for how long? It's
It
like
like months, you know what I
think about
mean?
all
Like,
the time you could have spent with your family.
yeah,
And
for
he
a
was like,
change.
stay away.
Stay away, go live your life. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it was interesting because I mean, you see that throughout the years in not even just movies, you see it in shows and stuff
Yeah.
like that, where it's like they get injured and they're a shadow of themselves and they just don't stay, go live your life. And I know when I was reading about the film, a little bit more about the film, I think it sounded like people got frustrated with that, but it was like, but that was the that was the time period in which it was made.
Well, and like people are going to get upset at John Ford for making a traditionally masculine expression of emotions. What were you expecting? Kind of
Exactly.
thing. Because like
Yeah.
there's not a whole lot of there's not a whole lot of sensitivity
No.
in the male characters in a lot of John Ford films. And
Yeah.
it was the time this was a man who was making films since 1915. So
Yeah, my God. Wow.
like there like this was a time where like and especially around this time the greatest generation it was or I guess trying to figure out how old he was. Greatest generation, forgotten generation, whichever
Right.
whatever line. But like this was a time where it was like very like this was the expectation of what a man is.
Yes. Yeah.
And like I imagine like this is a lot more frustrating of a movie to watch in 2024 than it probably was in
Yeah.
1957.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Because like
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people watch this in 1957. I was like, yep, he's just being a man.
Yep, being a man,
Yep.
it's doing what he's expected to do. Those guys, they're full of it and whatever. And like you said, it was like a part of a norm. You try to apply today's norms to that, you can't,
No.
you just can't.
But this was another John Ford film as we get on through the rest of this series. I know next week I'm going to be joined by my friend Kevin for the Growler story, which is actually a short film about another war hero.
Okay.
So there's a lot of them left. in terms of like stories of like
Yeah.
of war heroes and stuff like that. And you can tell John Ford's getting later in his career, and I think leaning into some of his comfort zones, I think. And this makes a lot of sense for like this man who's been directing films for 40 something years up to this point. That like, yeah, I'm gonna make a movie about my friend.
Yeah.
What of it? So like nobody was
Whatever.
telling him what to do.
No.
And then I'd like to wrap things up with some recommendations. And Amy, what would you like to recommend to everybody?
Um, it's a movie that I've talked to you probably you
Mhm.
poor thing ad nauseum at this point. It's a movie called Manhunter,
Mhm.
and it's based off of the Thomas Harris his original book
Yeah.
where we get introduced to Hannibal Lecter for the very first time.
Mhm.
And I just find it to be it's very 80s, but it's
Yes.
very 80s. But I think it when you are someone who's a fan of those books and those films, it's a great place to start
Mhm.
to get a sense of how Hannibal Lecter is introduced, and then in comparison, like it gives you a little backstory about the director of the FBI, like the whatever he was, the behavioral unit. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great film. And like I said, if it's 80s, but it's still a great film.
Well, and it's early Michael Mann too, which is
Early
insane
Michael Mann. Yeah,
because between that and Thief with James Caan, like those were some of his earlier films. So like this was before, he did Last of the Mohicans, Heat, Collateral,
yeah,
The Insider. So like that was like
such
his
good
peak
films.
early 90s into early
Yeah,
2000s. I love Collateral. I
yeah.
love that movie a lot. And he's something else. And Michael Mann's making a sequel to it.
Oh, how about that? How about that?
Yeah.
That I would love to see as well.
Just
Yeah,
imagining Al Pacino showing back up as a elder Detective Hannah, still
yep,
screaming like he's on cocaine. Um Apparently that was in the original script, and then Al Pacino did get the memo to not act like that.
nope,
Makes so much more sense.
yeah.
But I love the cast of Manhunter too because the amount of hours that I've watched CSI
Yes,
or
yeah.
other versions of that show,
Yeah.
NCIS, everything, but William Peterson Grissom
Oh,
being in there as Will Graham, who Edward Norton's a great actor, like
right.
did not sell me as well on like this character like William
Exactly.
Peterson did
Yeah.
when they did Red Dragon. And
Yeah.
also, who told Edward Norton had blonde hair? Um, it's so weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like looking at this, his wife was played by Kim Grace, who was in Brazil.
Yeah. Oh, I
I
didn't know that.
I
Okay.
didn't piece that together. It's been a while since I watched Manhunter.
Yeah.
Joan Allen, who I think I
No.
recognized her originally from like the Bourne Ultimatum
Yeah. Okay.
because
Okay.
she's one of the government officials in there that's like sympathetic to Jason Bourne,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
she plays the love interest, and like Brian Cox, much more subdued
Yeah.
portrayal of Hannibal Lecter, and you even got like Dennis Farina uh,
Yes.
popping
That's
up
so
there
80s,
as yes as Jack
Yeah.
Crawford,
Yeah.
who was played by Harvey Keitel in the remake,
Oh,
which
that's right.
I feel like I feel like Scott Glenn did such a great job as him in Silence of the Lambs. It's hard for me to like
Yeah.
see anybody else, but no, Dennis Farina does a really good job. It's just a great cast. Tom Noonan, who this whole entire film has like this film won't work unless you have a strong performance for Francis Dollarhide, who the
Yes.
Tooth Fairy, the Red Dragon, and it just really works. And the climax of this film to Inagata Devita
Yeah.
by
With that
Iron
music
Butterfly,
pounding, pounding, pounding. Yeah. Yeah.
so good. Now, I usually do three recommendations: a new film, a film from my watch list that I watched, and one of my movies that I rewatched. Not gonna lie, since the last time I recorded one of these episodes, I've been so fixated trying to catch up on screeners. I've only watched
Oh,
newer
yeah.
movies. and also Rob Zombie's two Halloween movies, which I will not be recommending on here. My
Not even,
recommendation is
no,
just go watch John Carpenter's Halloween.
please. Yeah.
Yes, instead. But I do want to recommend The Wild Robot,
Okay.
DreamWorks' new animated film, which I remember when the trailer came out to this, I'm like, this looks like this could be really cool. DreamWorks has been on a roll with like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, which had no right to be as great as it was after how mediocre the first Puss in Boots movie
Right.
was, and then it came out 11 years later. But this film is gorgeous,
Yeah.
so rich. You will, the vast majority of people will probably be crying on and off for the last 30 minutes of this movie.
Oh, okay.
It hits. It
Wow.
hits. Poor Jess was sitting next to me sobbing.
Oh no. That'll be me then. I can be that person.
And Lupita Nyong'o, who
Oh,
plays the
I love
robot, oh
Lupita.
my God, her voice performance is so perfect. And there's so many great performers in it. Pedro Pascal, Bill
Okay.
Nighy, Mark Hamill voices a
Oh
bear.
wow. Okay.
Catherine O'Hara is one of my
Oh,
favorite characters. She plays a possum with a bunch of
okay.
kid possums. This movie is legitimately hilarious too. There's some serious gallows humor coming from those like baby opossums.
Oh,
It's so funny.
oh
Like,
no.
and then Matt Berry plays a beaver, and
Okay.
it's so great. But the action's amazing. The music is one of the best scores that I've heard this year. It's probably up there with one, the Challengers theme, which is like you're going to the club, and then Hans Zimmer's Dune,
Oh, how
part
about
two
that? Yeah.
score.
Wow.
But this has a really deep, two parallel deep messages about disability, honestly, and overcoming that. And there's some really
Wow.
great, like meaningful and impactful dialogue from, Sagely Geese, voiced by Bill Nighy. And also conservation and the wild and
Yeah.
how our ecosystems all play a part with each other and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And also, it has like evil technology and evil robots, so that
Of
got my
course.
attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's one particular one voiced by Stephanie Shu, who was in Everything Everywhere
Oh,
All at Once.
yeah. Yep.
Um, she's going up there. I'm staring over at my HAL 9000 ornament that I have in my office at home. It's just like going up there with Otto from Wally and
Oh,
HAL
wow.
9000. It's just like, nope, evil robots, don't like them.
Right. Right.
But no, I would really recommend this. To be honest, I think it would
Forward
be
to.
great to see in a theater. It's going to be on Peacock eventually
Okay.
because it's a DreamWorks film.
Yeah.
And they come out reasonably soon after theaters, not like 17 days later, which is too early.
Yeah. A
Um,
little bit.
unless the movie completely bombs,
Yeah.
which
Then you can understand it.
looking at you, Megalopolis,
I heard.
120,
Yeah.
$120 million budget made $4 million domestically this
Oh,
weekend.
wow.
And that was all of Francis Ford Coppola's own money.
That's awful. Wow.
Awful. And also, I saw My Old Ass again after I had a press screening for it, and then I saw it this
Okay.
weekend, and it was even better and hit just as hard the second time around. So I would also
Okay.
encourage that one. I love Aubrey Plaza.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that is a wrap here. But Amy, thank you so much for coming on. This was a
Oh my
pleasure.
gosh. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed it. Thank you for encouraging me to watch a John Ford film. I
Mhm.
only ever heard it in the background when I was that big, you know
There
what
you
I
go.
mean? And so it was a pleasure to do this. Thank you, Shane.
Absolutely. And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.